implication or Honorable Chair and members, I want to address the committee on the objectives of the bill. According to the bill, its primary objective is provide for the protection of the sovereignty of the people of Uganda and provide for the registration and regulation of agents of foreigners as well as their funding. The bill creates an impression that Uganda and its people lack the necessary laws to uphold their sovereignty. According to the bill's memorandum, Uganda lacks laws that protect its ability to self-govern, and the foreign aid that some members of our civil society receive causes a duplication or conflict with government programs, thereby giving outsiders influence over our country and undermining our right to self-determination. It is also claimed in the bill that foreigners and their agents in Uganda use online platforms to facilitate social discord, and further suggests that civil society organizations funded by foreigners do not operate in accordance with the interests of Uganda. In our humble view, the foregoing representations cannot be any further from the truth. Uganda already has several laws that sufficiently address whatever mischief the bill seeks to cure, and the laws that we have in place stipulate sanctions if violated. Chief among these is the 1995 Constitution, which in Directive Principle 4 and Article 1 guarantee the sovereignty of the people of Uganda. Notwithstanding the unconstitutional nature of some of their provisions, other laws that already address the defects purportedly identified include the Computer Misuse Act, the Anti-Money Laundering Act, the Political Parties and Organizations Act, the Presidential Elections Act, the Parliamentary Elections Act, NGO Act, and among others. You notice, Honorable Chair and members, that, for example, the Political Parties and Organizations Act sets in place how much money a political party can receive in a given year from foreign sources. Ironically, since it regained independence in 1962, Uganda has greatly benefited from the warmth and generosity selflessly extended to it by the international community. That community currently funds nearly half of our recurrent national budget. We've even seen, I think the State Minister for Disaster Preparedness now appealing to countries of the world to come in and support Uganda because of USAID funding gaps. And so you wonder why the government itself thinks that it should be getting foreign funding and yet seeks to block or regulate heavily NGOs, political parties, and other organizations from being able to do the same. More still, the very system of government that Uganda is running today and the architecture of its public service are largely creatures that some international community dismisses, that the bill dismisses as foreigners and seeks to shut out from Uganda's affairs. Yet, if it were not for the intervention of foreigners like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund at the close of the 20th century, Uganda's economy, which the NRM government takes credit for, would probably be doing far worse. We are therefore convinced that the stated objectives of the Protection of Sovereignty Bill are not sincere, and the bill ought to be accordingly withdrawn in its entirety. The National Unity Platform believes that this bill is completely unnecessary. At the outset, I wish to also concerned about the speed at which this bill is being processed, and we hope that stakeholders will be given sufficient time to give their input, especially because of the implications of such a bill. Now let's look at some of the implications. While ostensibly seeking to sovereignty, this bill severely limits the ability of Ugandan citizens to exercise or enjoy their fundamental rights and freedoms. It fails to meet the constitutional threshold required for such limitations by Article 43 of our Constitution as below. 1. Whereas on the surface, the bill states in its objectives that it aims at protecting the sovereignty of Uganda and its citizens, it collapses under scrutiny. 1. The bill conflates the interests of a sitting government with the interests of the wider public. This is seen, for example, in clauses such as Clause 2(2)(g) and Clause 8(3), which prohibit citizens from influencing the public to oppose a policy of government and from hindering or disrupting the implementation of government policy, respectively. Honorable Chair, our duty as the opposition, for example, whether we are in Uganda or abroad, is to oppose government policy. That's why we are there as the opposition, to oppose what the present government is doing. What this bill is saying is that if someone is opposed to public policy, and you're a foreigner, and I'll come to that, then you are committing a crime. This bill is essentially criminalizing opposition. We know that in Uganda, opposition has already been criminalized, but once you say, that citizens should not influence public policy or oppose the policy of government, then I think that's extremely unconstitutional. The bill targets conduct that is already regulated by existing laws, as we already submitted above. The public interest apparently claimed in the bill's memorandum, that is of filling legal gaps, is therefore factually false in the face of the existing laws. C. Several provisions of the bill have no conceivable public interest anchor. For instance, Clause 22G, which implicitly requires anyone who influences the public to oppose the policy of government to first seek approval of that government, does not, protect any public good. Instead, it shields policy of that government from public criticism, thereby unjustifiably limiting the public's freedom of speech and its right to participate in the affairs of government. This clause alone effectively bans the political opposition, like I've said. Even where such public interest exists, demonstrably justifiable in a free and democratic society as envisaged by Article 43(2)(a) of the Constitution. For example, in this bill, under clauses 3, 4, 6, 6, 14(1), 15, 16, etc. of the bill, these clauses effectively place entire regulatory and enforcement mechanisms of the bill under the direct control and or guidance of the Minister of Internal Affairs, a political appointee who is appointed by and answerable to a sitting president. The said clauses grant the minister wide discretion to register, deregister, refuse, suspend, or revoke the operational certificates of anyone deemed to be an agent of a foreigner, with no meaningful procedural safeguards to restrain the existence of that power, the exercise of that power. This exposes opposition politicians, NGOs, investigative journalists, researchers, whistleblowers, and other real and perceived opponents of the minister and his appointing authority to political persecution. Therefore, these limitations are disproportionate and thus unjustifiable. As we have stated above, the objectives stated in the bill do not match the provisions therein enacted. In our view, for example, clauses 5, 3, 7, 4, 8, 3, 10, 12, 13, 14, and 22 of the bill effectively suppress dissent instead of protecting the self-determination of the people of Uganda. We also consider the following clauses to be overly broad and disproportionate for the reasons indicated against each. The definition of a foreigner under clause 1 of the bill is as ridiculous as it is the foundational source of the bill's overbreadth. Every substantive offense in the bill is construed around this definition of a foreigner, meaning that it is disproportionate, that which infects almost every provision. Our view is that once you begin with the definition of a foreigner in that manner, that particular provision affects the rest of the bill, and that is why we oppose it in its entirety. The definition is unconstitutional because, first, it includes Ugandan citizens residing out of Uganda. It means, Mr. Honorable Chair, that if a Ugandan goes on a plane or moves by any other means out of Uganda, that person at that point has become a foreigner. How ridiculous. This provision is unconstitutional. It renders these people foreigners in their own country by their mere fact of physical location abroad. The presupposition is that maybe they should even abandon their passports. That once you move out of Uganda, even if you have a Ugandan passport, at that point you've become a foreigner. Any Ugandan in the diaspora who sends money to their family or funds a political campaign or communicates political views to relatives at home is considered a foreigner. And thus, whoever is based in Uganda who wishes to deal with him or her requires ministerial permission. Second, and most critically, the definition empowers a minister to declare any person or body a foreigner. This delegation grants a minister open-ended power to expand the definition of a foreigner to capture any individual organization at will without any defined criteria. Such a definition, which can be expanded by ministerial decree at any time, provides no legal certainty whatsoever, thereby violating the right to a fair trial and the principle of legality. It is also ridiculous because it implies that even government officials who go out of the country on official duties automatically become foreigners who are then forbidden to conduct the business of the state. Now, close the problems with this bill, Honorable Chair, and why we think it should be thrown out, is the nature in which it defines or it sets principles very, very broadly and therefore subjects them to abuse at any point. Consider 5.3, in which the phrase interests of Uganda. Who defines what interests of Uganda are? You know, it renders the related offense vague. This violates citizens' right to free speech and association, because everybody will be asking themselves if what I'm going to say, whether what I'm going to say is contrary to the interests of Uganda or not, because who defines what the interests of Uganda amounts to? Clause 6.1 and 2 require cabinet approval before any person performs functions ordinarily the responsibility of government, as listed in the 6th schedule to the Constitution, cripple legitimate NGO service delivery in sectors like health and education, in disproportionate violation of citizens' freedom of association, right to work, civic participation, etc. Clause 7.3 criminalizes policy development without cabinet approval. Can you imagine? Thus effectively outlawing opposition manifestos, academic policy work, research, which is disproportionate violation of citizens' freedom of expression, thought, and opinion. Clause 8.3 prohibits acts that hinder or disrupt government policy implementation without necessarily requiring unlawfulness or harm. Left as it is, this clause converts such actions as democratic opposition, litigation, and even journalism into criminal conduct, which constitutes a disproportionate violation of the freedom of expression and the freedom of assembly. Clause 11.2 prohibits foreign-linked influence over our elections. Honorable Chair, that's very, very problematic. Now, when you read that and compare it to the definition of the foreigner in Clause 1, and then the bill is saying that, you know, foreigners should not influence our elections. And these foreigners include Ugandans in the diaspora. So does that mean that Ugandans in the diaspora should now not have a say in how elections are run? In any case, the High Court of Uganda has already declared that Ugandans in the diaspora should be given an opportunity to even vote. But as you know, that right has not been implemented by the Electoral Commission and other agencies. So it's ridiculous to say that if a foreigner is, you know, influencing elections in Uganda, and then with that broad definition of a foreigner, it is very, very problematic. Right to vote and participation in electoral processes. Clause 12.1 prohibits any meeting aimed at interfering with government operations without establishing a threshold for when such a meeting would become unlawful. Effectively outlaws opposition political rallies, trade union activities, etc., in violation of freedoms protected by Articles 29(1)(a) and D and 43 of the Constitution of Uganda. Clause 13 makes it an offense for anyone to publish any information, even if it may be true, or participate in any act that weakens or damages the economic system or viability of the country, causing economic disruption, insecurity, or instability. How do you define this? It is so broad that the government will wake up one day and choose to interpret it in any way it desires. Besides being vague, this provision suppresses journalism and political criticism, which disproportionately violates citizens' right to speak freely and access to information, as well as Article 43 itself, as no legitimate democratic society criminalizes truthful publication. Clause 22.1 imposes a funding cap of 400 million per 12 months on affected organizations, and that is likely to cripple activities of such organizations as opposed to encouraging them. You know, Honorable Chair, for example, the National Unity Platform irregularly has been prohibited from getting public funds that it ordinarily should be entitled to. That's a debate for another day. So what this bill is saying is that NUP as a political party should not be receiving funding of this magnitude, you know, from what it is defining as a foreigner. Effectively, you're saying we have crippled you internally and even crippled your probable sources. You know, if Ugandans in the diaspora collect money collectively and want to send it in one go, this bill says that is a crime being committed. So, which again makes the intentions of the bill suspect. Clause 23(1), which defines disruptive activities to include...
First, I must commend the eloquence of the Secretary General.
The Honorable Fox
is not appreciating that. Please, give credit where it's due.
First of all, I appreciate for your presentation, but mine goes on the issue of diaspora. I'd like to bring it to the attention. First of all, I appreciate for your presentation, but mine goes on the issue of diaspora.